Hello everyone, this is part 27 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Did you know? The large fox looked back at Naruto and slowly shook her head. Naruto just growled dangerously, "Don't lie to me. I can turn this place back into a sewer, you know." The QB just scowled at the idea she would lie, manipulate, tell half-truths, evade questions. Yes, lie, no. I assure you I did not know. It was as much of a surprise for me as it was for you. Naruto scowled, staring at the fox as he searched for any deception in her eyes. How could you not know? He was the one who sealed you. Kurama narrowed her eyes and quickly counted. And he was the one who conceived you. Naruto just fumed as he sat down on the grass, laying back and looking up at the sky before pounding his fist furiously into the ground like a child having a temper tantrum. But all this time, Kyubi just sighed as she walked over slowly, sitting behind Naruto and letting him rest his head against her soft body. "Kushina, your mother, was my last Jinchuriki." Naruto looked around into Kyubi's eyes, but she ignored him, instead staring off into the distance of the fake world they resided in. "Her seal was much tighter than yours. I knew barely anything of what went on during my time inside of her." Naruto turned back around, placing his head back down on Kyubi's fur. "I caught glimpses during her moments of weakness, such as when she was scared or angry or." Naruto looked around but didn't speak when he saw the slight blush on Kurama's face, even through her fur. "It was how I came to know of her, of Minato, of the Leaf Village. I lived for those brief glimpses of the world outside, otherwise I was chained down so securely I couldn't twitch a hair on my tails." She sighed, unconsciously rubbing a tail against her paw where a chakra chain had once been embedded. "If I had known about her having a child I would have told you, but by the time I escaped, well, I wasn't of the soundest mind." Naruto didn't pry. The events leading up to her sealing inside of him were always a touchy subject. What was she like? Kurama looked around, smiling softly as she saw all the anger had left Naruto. Instead he just seemed a little empty. "Like I said, I only caught glimpses, but from what I saw, a lot like you. She was passionate but had a temper that was legendary in Konoha. They called her the Red Hot Habanera." Naruto smiled fondly at the name, making him chuckle as he realized his father was the Yellow Flash and his mother was the Red Hot Habanera. No wonder he loved the color orange so much. "What about the four?" He paused for a moment as he stared wistfully up at the illusionary sky. "My father." Kurama looked down at him, taking a deep breath which raised Naruto's head up on her side. "Powerful, intelligent, charismatic, hands." Naruto looked up at her curiously as she coughed and looked away. "Handy around the house." Naruto frowned but settled back down onto her side, not noticing the new blush that adorned the fox's face. "A true genius of his time, much like you. He was always thinking of new ideas and techniques, always trying to surpass his limitations with speed, seals, his techniques, everything." Naruto smiled as he thought of the bond he now shared with his father through their mutual love of jutsu. "Would they be proud of me?" Kyubi just looked down at Naruto, a little bemused. "Who am I to say?" Naruto frowned, but in the end he saw her point. She didn't really know them, not personally. She definitely wouldn't know their thoughts about him, even if he so desperately wanted that to be true. "Thanks anyway, Kurama, for at least being honest with me." The large fox nodded her head slowly, settling it down on her paws as she stared off into the forest that surrounded them. "Try not to focus on the past, Kit. Instead focus on what you can still change. Look to make those around you proud as opposed to those who are dead." Naruto sighed. He knew what she was saying was true, but he couldn't help but wonder just what his parents would say if they could see him today. Would they approve of him leaving the village? His father was the Hokage after all, and if he had survived, Naruto would have been a part of his clan. Would they have approved of Tayuya? Strangely, Naruto found that he didn't care all that much. It brought a smirk to his face. "Why do you think the old man kept it from me?" Kyubi just scoffed as she shifted her body into a more comfortable position, prompting Naruto to do the same. "You saw how that old goat Unoki reacted. You don't think if Iwa had known about you they wouldn't have tried to kill you as revenge for what your father did during the war?" Naruto nodded with a frown as he thought back to the old man in Suna who had simply attacked him because he looked like Minato. He chuckled softly, the clues were all there, the resemblance, his love of seals, hell even his fashion sense with his cloak. I'm a bit of an idiot for not seeing it sooner, aren't I? Kyubi smiled softly, not lifting her head off her paws. No more so than those around you. People tend to see only what they want or expect to see, it's just human nature. Naruto nodded calmly, yawning as he stretched out on Kyubi's warm body. Well, I think that's enough hiding, I better go out and face everyone. I'm sure there'll be a lot of awkward questions I can't answer. Kyubi smirked as he stood up, stretching off his imaginary body. I'm always just a thought away. Naruto smiled down at her kindly, scratching her lightly between the ears which earned him a small purr of pleasure. I know. Naruto woke up stiffly and it took him a moment to loosen up his neck before he could look down. His waking up had disturbed Tayuya who blearily cracked her eyes open, sitting up with him as she rubbed them free of dust. She smiled as she looked him over, checking that he was okay. Once satisfied she quickly hugged him before swinging her legs out of the bed and standing up. She stretched which gave Naruto an excellent view of her panties getting pulled up her firm thighs. Good to see you're finally up, shithead. Gaara was worried about you. She looked at him for a moment as he looked back. She was smirking furiously as he just looked down at his own body. What? Tayuya just grinned before plopping herself back down on the bed next to him. You fainted, that's fucking gay. Naruto just pouted while she giggled. How would you react if you find out the man you looked up to your whole life was your father? Tayuya just stared at him curiously, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Happily. Naruto pouted again while Tayuya stood up again. Aside from that, Tayuya just shrugged. She honestly thought she was better off without her family, otherwise she never would have met Naruto. Stop fucking reminiscing, shithead, and come join me in the shower. Naruto was silent for a moment before a grin spread across his face. He quickly ran after Tayuya just as her ass disappeared around the corner of their ensuite bathroom. Gaara looked quite relieved when he saw Tayuya and Naruto emerge from their room with damp hair and large grins plastered over their faces. Fu looked on with concern, hearing what had happened. She hadn't been there because Matsuri had offered to take her for something to eat while Gaara had gone to check on the disturbance at the gate. Gaara had later told her what happened and she was shocked to say the least. Even in Takagakure she had heard of Minato Namikaze, and to think that her brother was his son was strange. Onisen. Naruto nearly found himself bowled over as Fu practically launched herself at him. He swiftly caught her as she wrapped her smaller arms around him as he just smiled in amusement. Hey Fu, it's not like I was dead or something. Fu just squeezed him tighter. Even the thought of her big brother dying was too much for her. He was a pillar of strength to her, something constant and unbreakable that she had built her new life around. He carefully set her back down before ruffling her hair, knowing that the familiar, if slightly irritating gesture would remind her that he was still okay. You're taking this remarkably well. I would have thought you would have a more interesting reaction. Naruto smiled, knowing the redhead was alluding to his pranking days, before all his days were filling with either training, Tayuya or Fu. Yeah, well, I had some time to think about it. Everybody knew that he was talking about his mindscape, so just left it at that while Gaara nodded in understanding. Well, he looked over at Tayuya in confusion. Well, what? Tayuya just sighed as she playfully punched him in the arm. What are you going to do about it? Naruto blinked. Honestly, he hadn't thought about it that much. He wasn't even sure what he could do about it. He was sure there were probably some things his parents had left him, maybe an estate somewhere if Konoha hadn't used them when he left. Other than that, he realized it didn't change his life all that much. He was still a shinobi of Suna, he still had Tayuya and Fu, and he was still Naruto Uzumaki, although he guessed he could possibly take his father's name. Naruto Namikaze. Everybody looked at him strangely before he realized he said it out loud. Tayuya seemed thoughtful while inside she was thinking along the same lines. Tayuya Namikaze, Tayuya Uzumaki, Tayuya Uzumaki Namikaze, Fu just smiled at her brother thinking the name sounded cool. I think it suits you. Naruto smiled at Matsuri, but inside he was still contemplating it. Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki. Everybody just laughed lightly, the mood returning to how it usually was between them. Yes, well, I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to think of all the ways you could change your name. As you might have noticed, the cage conference is today and the only one yet to arrive is the Mizukage. Naruto just nodded as he pulled on his coat, the black flame decals now having another meaning. He was thinking of all the ways he could really shock Konoha as payback for his childhood, thinking about one of his old ideas to walk into Iwahenge as the fourth. He wondered if he could get a coat just like his maid, that would really freak him out. With a start he realized his father's things, including the coat, could still be in Konoha somewhere, as well as his mother's, and they would belong to him. Suddenly all that pressure he had relieved in his mindscape came hurtling back down on his shoulders as the immensity of having a family was fully realized. Breathe, Kit. He did that, taking in a large breath before straightening up. He could discuss all of that with Tsunade later. For now he simply followed Gaara out of the nice hotel they had been staying at, holding his head high and uncovered with a large smirk adorning his features. For once the whispering of the people around him didn't bother him, he was content and he was happy. They made their way through the streets until they arrived at the Hokage Tower where the cage would be meeting in an hour's. He wondered where Mei was. He was sure she would have wanted to be here to make sure the Land of Water got their fair say. Hell, if Unoki could put aside his differences, somewhat, and stay for a few days, then she should have been able. Then again, Kiri was still recovering and they might have had more pressing matters to attend to. Even so, she could send somebody in her stead, at least so they knew what was happening. He would just have to wait and see. The meeting wasn't for an hour. Matsuri and Fu couldn't go into the meeting, so they went off somewhere together, which made Naruto smile. The two were really starting to bond. Naruto and Tayuya accompanied Gaara on either side, walking like the bodyguards they came here to be. They seemed to be the first to arrive at the hall and took their place, designated by the Sunagakure symbol on a small placard. The room wasn't all that big, but it had a large U-shaped table which was perfect for meetings such as these. Gaara calmly sat down while Tayuya and Naruto leaned against the wall behind him. A few minutes later Tsunade walked in, flanked on one side by Jiraiya and on the other by Kakashi. She hesitated when she saw that Gaara was already here, but more specifically she looked at Naruto, who didn't acknowledge her presence at all. She sighed before nodding curtly at Gaara, who returned the gesture. Tsunade took her place at the head of the table, but both she and Jiraiya sent worrying glances towards Naruto, who continued to stand silently, only watching out for any threats to his Kazekigen friend. Or was the next to arrive, bursting through the doors in his typical manner with his usual stony look. He was quickly followed by Bee and Yugito, who both waved at Naruto warmly. He smiled back at him, upsetting Tsunade that she didn't get that kind of reaction. Sat down next to Gaara on the far side from Tsunade while Bee and Yugito went and stood by Naruto and Tayuya, the four of them chatting fondly while the doors opened again. Surprisingly enough, it was Mei who entered next, Ao and Chojuro as her bodyguards. She seemed flustered by something and Chojuro was looking nervous, but they too took their place in the hall, sitting down in the seat next to Tsunade and opposite Gaara. She received the customary welcomes from the gathered cage before returning to her quiet irritation at whatever had gotten under her skin this time. Finally Unoki burst into the room, looking the angriest out of the five. He said nothing as he walked over to his seat, sitting down while at the same time shooting murderous looks in Naruto's direction. Tsunade looked around at the gathered cage and the personal escorts, some of the most powerful shinobi in the elemental nations all gathered in the same room. To anybody else it would have been frightened, but everybody had earned the positions in that room. She coughed loudly to get everybody's attention. As the host of the conference, it was her job to get the ball rolling. What is he doing here? Just as she was about to speak, Unoki had interrupted, still staring daggers at Naruto, who looked back impassively, an impressive feat when staring down a cage. Gaara also looked back calmly, although looking closer people could spot the fine mist of sand that had materialized around him out of nowhere. He is my escort, Unoki growled as people felt the tension in the room rise exponentially. I don't care who he is. I want the son of that bastard out of here. Gaara's eye narrowed imperceptibly as the floor around his feet began to swirl with sand. Naruto beat him to the punch though, as one of his kunai suddenly impacted with the wall behind Unoki's head, brushing his head by mere centimeters. The old man's eyes opened slightly wider, but the message was clear. If Naruto had wanted to, that kunai would have gone straight through his head. He growled imperceptibly at the young blonde shinobi, angered that he would dare try to even get near to striking a cage. After the boy had passed out in the street, he had been quickly carried away by Gaara and Tayuya while Tsunade kept him or his shinobi from meddling. It angered him that after all this time the fourth son had been hidden from him and he wasn't able to do a damn thing about it. All eyes turned to Naruto as the two rock shinobi suddenly rushed him, leaping up and over the table to apprehend the man who had attacked their Chuchikage. However, as soon as they got close, Naruto simply vanished, reappearing where his kunai had impacted with the wall. Unoki turned to him, shocked at seeing the jutsu in use after so long, as Naruto simply stared him down. I would appreciate if you did not talk about my father that way. His tone was cold, far more deadly than somebody his age should have been able to muster, although Unoki was unperturbed. The other Kage watched the confrontation silently, although had a small smirk just tweaking at the edge of his mouth as he saw Naruto go toe-to-toe with Unoki. By that point Akatsuki and Kuretsuki had managed to get back to the grandfather's side, but Naruto simply disappeared again, reappearing next to Tayuya in a flash of yellow. The room was silent as everybody just looked at Naruto in wonder, but his face had returned to his neutral, impassive glare. Both the Reikage and Mizukage were a little shocked by the confrontation, as were the various bodyguards and escorts around the room. However, had always had his suspicions about Naruto, this simply confirmed them. Likewise, Mei smiled as she realized why Unoki was so upset and the nagging feeling that she had about Naruto. Tsunade finally cleared everything up as he coughed loudly, drawing all attention to her. Now that is out of the way, I think we should get down to business. Unoki snarled but reluctantly sat back down. Gaara too recalled his sand, reabsorbing it into his body. Tsunade smiled pleasantly, but inside she was reconsidering if doing this was such a good idea after all. Now then, I believe Kazekage Dono would like to begin. Gaara nodded as the same files that he had given to Tsunade were handed out to each Kage via their escorts. Contained in those files is all the information currently known about the Akatsuki, their members and the various strengths. As you can see, both their spy networks and their monetary base have been dealt a crippling blow with the loss of members Sasori, formerly of Suna, and Kakazu, formerly of Taki. The other Kage nodded absently as they read through the surprisingly detailed report while Tayuya smirked. Jiraiya also had a flick through it, seeing as Tsunade had already read it all. His eyes widened visibly when he came across a name he never thought he would see again. Unoki was also seething when he came across Deodara's report, noting the large black X across his photo, which could only mean one thing. He kept it to himself though, but he knew he would have to deliver the news to Kuretsuki later. She wasn't going to be happy. Jiraiya was the first to speak up even as he flicked through the dossier some more. This is an impressive report. How did you get this information? Gaara smiled lightly and Tayuya's smirk increased. Tsunade groaned, knowing that would be the first thing Jiraiya would note. Tayuya infiltrated the ranks of Akatsuki personally. She was the one to compile all the information before her situation became compromised by the death of Sasori. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes, looking over Tayuya once. Wasn't that a little irresponsible to send a Chunin into an organization composed of only S-ranked criminals? Gaara just raised his brow at Jiraiya, curious as to the man's intentions. What I do with my shinobi is none of your concern. I understood her capabilities, and it was the fact that she appeared to pose no threat to the organization that made her ideal for the mission. That, and I trusted that during her tenure as a spy she would be able to suitably increase in power enough to earn their respect and infiltrate the organization better. She is also one of my most trusted friends. If I did not believe her able, I would not have done so. Gaara spoke the entire time with a perfectly level voice, making his argument sound incredibly convincing. Yes, well, origins of the information aside, I think it is more pertinent that we discuss what to do with the organization itself. With 4 members currently dealt with, I believe we will not have a better opportunity than we do now. The Kage, despite all their differences and petty disputes, nodded in agreement. The organization was becoming too much of a pain. Maybe Toby can help. Everybody in the room shot around as the unfamiliar voice spoke up. They were all shocked to see none other than a man dressed in Akatsuki robes with an orange spiral mask flipping through the pages of the file. Immediately, faster than most could even think, Naruto sent a kunai flying at the man, only to watch it pass right through him as if he weren't there. The man looked up from the file and everybody could have sworn they could see a pout on his face, despite the mask. Toby didn't make it into the file. He'll show you. Toby is a good boy and will make it into the Akatsuki for sure once he delivers the message from Leader Sama. He clapped and laughed enthusiastically, causing everybody in the room to seriously doubt the man's sanity. Gaara on the other hand stared at him critically. He was not in the file but he perfectly matched the description Tayuya gave of Toby, that and he kept referring to himself as such. What message? Toby turned to Gaara but it was clear he was addressing the entire room. Leader Sama wants to deliver a warning. If the mean old cage give up the Jinchuriki then nobody else has to get hurt. He turned his attention over to Naruto. Leader Sama also wanted to tell Namikaze-san to give back the rings he stole because stealing isn't a very nice thing to do. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the man before calmly reaching into the pouch on his belt. He removed the rings before slowly and deliberately sliding them onto the fingers on his right hand. Tell Pian to come and get them himself. Toby just nodded furiously. Will do. Again his sanity was brought into question as the strange man bounced enthusiastically. Suddenly Naruto disappeared, appearing not a second later with a Rasengan in his hand which he attempted to plunge into Toby's unprotected back, only to phase right through the man. When he was fully out of Toby's body the masked man swiftly grabbed him by the collar of his coat and with surprising strength slammed him into the ground, or would have if Naruto hadn't flashed over to Tayuya. Haha, you're fast Namikaze-san but your daddy already tried that one on me. Fool me once shame on him, fool me twice. Toby started to phase through the floor, and we'll kill you. He disappeared from the room entirely with a sinister giggle, leaving the cage to suddenly erupt in an outcry. How did he get in here? What are you playing at Tsunade? Mizukage-sama, this place is not safe, we must leave immediately. Why do you have those rings, boy? Quiet. Everybody stopped their bickering as Tsunade stood up, throwing her chair back into the wall to stick there with a dull crack. Kakashi and Jiraiya were forced to jump out of the way of the deadly chair or risked getting crushed into the wall. Everybody just stared at Tsunade before she sat down on the new chair Jiraiya somehow produced. Now then, are we going to bicker among ourselves like a fresh genin team or are we going to sit down and discuss what just happened? All the cage present, save Gaara who remained stoic, grumbled but sat back down nevertheless. Now, it is clear the Akatsuki are trying to intimidate us with this obvious scare tactic but we are cage, we should not respond to such a threat by blowing it out of proportion. There are only 6 of them and thousands of us, they only pose a threat if we remain divided and continue to put our Jinchuriki at risk with isolation. Naruto huffed from his position across the room but luckily everybody ignored him, save Unoki who sent him another dangerous look. What's this about our Jinchuriki? Iwa has already lost Han and Roshi to those bastards while none have lost anybody. Hell, Suna already have 3 Jinchuriki, 2 of them in this very room. Maybe they could spare one of them. Whatever happened to the balance of power your predecessor and my begrudging equal was always blathering on about? Naruto growled again. It was really starting to get to him how Unoki kept blatantly disrespecting the past Hokages and the 2 people he looked up to. If Jiraiya's expression told anything he also wasn't very happy. The Jinchuriki that have taken Suna as their home have all done so of their free will, myself included. Unoki just laughed right in Gaara's face as he pointed straight at Naruto. Right, from what I heard he stole the 7 tails right out of Takagakure, injuring some of their civilians to do so. Naruto growled again as the grip around his kunai tightened, turning his knuckles white. I saved Fu from that place. Onoki sneered at the blonde, daring him to make a move. More like kidnapped. Naruto growled even louder as his canines began to elongate, to the notice of everybody present. You have no right to judge me, only they have that right. He motioned to Gaara, B, and Yugito before looking around at the room. All of you talk about protecting us, keeping us away from the Akatsuki but there's a reason they are so easily able to get to us. You treat us like prized weapons to be fought over and protected but what do you do in times of peace? You treat us like demons, letting your people fear or hate us and treat us like animals. That's the life I took Fu away from and that's the life I escaped here in Konoha. His eyes had already shifted to red slits by the time he was finished and he was being visibly restrained by a wall of sand. Naruto. No. The Jinchuriki have been mistreated for long enough. If you value us so much then start fucking showing it. He panted heavily before taking a deep breath and controlling himself. When his eyes opened again they were back to the usual cerulean blue and his teeth had retracted. The room was shocked into silence, even Yugito and B were staring at Naruto. Nobody had ever spoken out with such passion about them before. The Biju aren't your weapons to control and neither are the Jinchuriki. We are shinobi yes but we are also humans. Naruto huffed loudly before taking his place back against the wall behind Gaara. He had enough of old men and women making decisions about the futures of others. The rest of the room was silent again as everybody absorbed what the blonde had said. Even Unoki seemed pensive as he remembered Han. They had been good friends before the hatred of the village drove the kind man out. Naruto just held up a hand at Tsunade, his eyes narrowing as he looked anywhere but at her face. Save it, it's not like it matters. If I have to, I'll kill every last member of the Akatsuki before they hurt anybody close to me. He wrapped his arms across his chest, clearly indicating the topic was over. After a few moments of awkward silence, the room returned to a somewhat state of calm as more matters were discussed. Naruto had lost interest long ago. Ultimately nothing was agreed upon. Their villages had too many differences, both idealistic and history-wise. The cage filed out of the room quietly, Gaara and Tsunade being the last ones left in the room, but before Unoki left he walked over to Naruto, putting everybody on guard. You speak with the same passion as your father did. With that the man turned on his heel and walked out of the room, shocking everybody by the abrupt declaration. Naruto blinked in surprise before watching the old man leave the room with a frown, wondering what brought that announcement on. Tsunade also looked like she was about to talk to him, but in the end she simply sighed and walked out, shaking her head. Naruto finally pushed himself off the wall, walking over to Jiraiya before the Toad Sage could run off to do Kami knows what. Well Naruto, you certainly spoke with conviction back there. Naruto just narrowed his eyes. Why wasn't I told? His voice held no real hostility, and to be honest he perfectly understood the reasons behind the decision, he just wanted to hear it for himself. Jiraiya seemed to understand that as he took in Naruto's weary expression, placing a hand on the blonde's shoulders. Sensei thought it best you didn't know until you were powerful enough to handle the responsibilities of both your father and mother's heritage. Both of them had gathered a fair few enemies in their time, and while unfair, many of those enemies would have looked to their only son for revenge. Then you left and he never had the chance, not that I believe he would have even by the Chunin exams mind you. Sensei tended to keep things close to his chest. Naruto just nodded tiredly. He felt all the anger from earlier wash away, not that he had forgiven him entirely. There's something else I need to talk to you about. Jiraiya just motioned to the door. Let's walk. I'm sure you have many questions about your parents. I don't know if you know this, but I was your father's sensei. Naruto just nodded. He did know that. Alright, let's talk. Despite the previous sentiments, both Naruto and Jiraiya walked through the streets of Konoha in silence. Neither really knew where they were going, but whenever Naruto felt Jiraiya start to meander towards the hot springs, he would divert them away. It was like the man's default destination. It was late and the sun was setting over the horizon, so the streets were slowly emptying, not that it stopped the stares and whispers sent Naruto's way. In the end, and Naruto had no idea how, they both found themselves atop the Hokage monument, sitting between the spikes of his father's stone hair. I used to come and do the exact same thing when I was your age. Naruto looked around, a little surprised at hearing the Toad Sage speak finally. We grew up in war, it made us treasure every moment of peace we got. When Sensei was made Hokage and the war finally ended, I sat up here, thinking about where my life would go from there. War is indescribable, an atrocity to nature, but after all that, after everything we went through. He sighed as he looked out over the village. The peace just seemed surreal, like a dream. He looked down sadly at Naruto. I don't know if the world is moving between cycles of war interspersed with times of peace, or if we're all just hopping between fragile moments of peace before the next war. He returned his attention to the setting sun, his eyes gleaming a little in the light as Naruto saw the younger man he had once been. However, I still hope for a world united under peace, where there's no need for war or hatred. Call me a fool if you like, but your father believed the same thing and he fought for that dream until the end. Naruto followed the man's gaze, watching the orange sun slowly melt into the horizon. Why are you telling me this? Jiraiya smiled fondly as he looked around, but unlike Naruto, who saw the man Jiraiya had been, he saw the man that Naruto could become. He sighed sadly again, knowing that he had little to no part in what had made him so strong and compassionate. Maybe because I feel you should know, maybe because I think your father and mother would have wanted me to tell you. To be honest, I don't really know. I know your life was hard here and I do regret not being here for you when I should have been, but I'll pay for my mistakes in the next life. For now I just thought I would get to know my godson. Naruto looked around. the faintest of smiles trying to etch its way onto his features. What were they like? He felt strange echoing the exact question he had asked Kurama, but still, he wanted to know. Jiraiya sighed, this time in melancholy, as he was brought back to a time when his student was still alive, when he was still starting out with the woman he would come to love. It looked as though his eyes were searching through each individual street in Konoha, as if he could pinpoint exact locations where the memories were strongest. Your father, he was loyal to a fault and stressed teamwork above everything else. I won't bore you by telling you he was a prodigy, or a genius, or the most powerful shinobi of his time, I'm sure you already know that. Before you were born he was so happy, always talking to me about what he was going to train you in, what friends you would make or how proud you would make him when you finally became a shinobi, as long as that was the choice you made. In fact, towards the end it got sort of annoying. Naruto shared a chuckle with the older man, even as he felt his eyes begin to water. Outside of home he was always calm, the most level-headed person you would ever meet. He could analyze any situation, break it down and come up with a strategy so fast it would make a Nara's head boggle. He was respected by everybody he met, and if they didn't like him when they met he made it his personal mission to make them like him. In the end though he was a fairly hopeless romantic, fell in love with the first girl he kissed. Naruto smiled, just one more thing he and his father could relate on. Your mother was a whole other story. A grin spread over Jiraiya's features as his gaze drifted over one of the spiral banners hanging from the Hokage Tower. Frightful temper that one would sooner smack you around the head than actually hear you out. Possibly the most hyperactive person I have ever met, and how your father tamed her is completely beyond me. Had this strange tick tended to end any sentence where she was embarrassed or angry with Databane, whatever the hell that meant. Naruto chuckled sheepishly, now rather glad Tayuya had been so strict about the way he spoke. Like your father though she was loyal, possibly more so. Shouldn't be surprising from an Uzumaki, but she placed family above everything else. It's only to be expected when you lose your home and clan, but even through that she was strong. He smiled kindly as he looked down at Naruto. The days when she was walking around with you still inside of her were the happiest of her life, a smile never left her face. He coughed suddenly as he looked around with a blush, well, except for one incident involving ramen, but that's beside the point. The two of them lapsed back into silence as they continued to stare out over the village. They had a house, you know, were going to raise you in it and everything. Minato was the last of his clan. He had escaped after a purge in Lightning Country and fled here, and by the time they met Izushi Ogakure had already started to fade in people's memories. They weren't rich and they didn't have a lot, but when they bought it I swear I never saw a larger smile on your father's face. I know that Suna is your home, but... He rooted around in his robe's pocket for a moment before withdrawing a key and throwing it over to the blonde. It's yours now. Naruto just stared down at the key. This was it, his inheritance, everything his parents had left him in life in a small brass object. His hand trembled ever so slightly as he closed his fingers around the key before slipping it into a pocket on his coat. Thanks. Jiraiya just nodded, patting Naruto on the shoulder as he stood up, stretching off his aching joints. I'll always be there if you need me, kid. Oh, and if you want to know more about your dad, speak to Kakashi. Minato was his sensei. As for your mother, I'm sure she had a genin team, but the names escape me. I'm sure you'll find out if you ask around. He smirked. Look for sword uses. Your mother was famous for her kenjutsu. He turned and started to leave, intending to give the blonde some privacy to think before Naruto almost slapped his head in idiocy. Oh Jiraiya, wait, I almost forgot to ask you something. The Sannin paused, turning back to his student's son curiously while Naruto scrabbled to his feet. I wanted to ask you about the key to my seal. Jiraiya's brows furrowed in concentration as he was pulled out of his nostalgia, becoming much more serious. What about it? Naruto just smirked. He knew the man had a reason to be defensive around the only thing keeping the Kyuubi at bay. I would like to have it. Jiraiya's eyebrows made a very good attempt to breach his hairline as he stared at Naruto in surprise and confusion. Why would you want something like that? It wouldn't be wise to start tampering with your seal, Naruto, no matter how far you have come in the sealing arts. Naruto just smiled kindly, cocking his head slightly to the side. Nothing so irresponsible. He heard a chuckle inside his head. Liar. Naruto's smile twitched a little on the outside, which Jiraiya might have noticed if he wasn't still a little shocked. Whose side are you on? The chuckling stopped suddenly. Good point, Kit. By now Jiraiya seemed to have recovered and was scrutinizing Naruto all over, mulling the request over in his head before he sighed. Fine. Naruto's eyes opened a little wider. He hadn't expected it to be that easy. In fact, he had expected to use more than a few bottles of sake and a trip to a brothel before he got the key. Really? Jiraiya just nodded with an amused expression on his face from seeing Naruto's surprise. I don't see why not. I'm not going to be around forever, so I can't have the key getting lost with me now, can I? Plus, the idea that I wouldn't let you carry the key almost feels like an insult to your father's sealing skills. If he said that the seal was iron tight, then I inclined to believe him without question. Naruto just beamed while Jiraiya mentally sighed again. Maybe this isn't such a good idea. With a small mental shrug, he ran through a few hand seals and slammed his palms into the ground. With no small amount of surprise, Naruto watched as a large scroll-like object stretched itself out of Jiraiya's opened mouth. His surprise turned to curiosity as he noticed the scroll had a head and some feet, and the fact it was about 6 feet long, and floating. He realized it was a toad, a very stretched out toad that's midsection seemed to be an actual scroll, bringing to question how such a thing was even physically possible. Jiraiya, it's been a while. What's the big idea summoning me? The toad looked around, staring at the blonde-haired boy who simply stared right back. What's the meaning of this, Jiraiya? I contain the seal to that kid's 8 trigrams seal. Don't you understand how dangerous it is to have a key so close to its lock? Jiraiya just smiled fondly at the worried toad. There is no trouble, Geratora. I have summoned you because it is time for Naruto to inherit his legacy. All of it. The toad narrowed his eyes at Naruto, sizing the blonde up before turning back to Jiraiya. You can't be serious, Jiraiya. The kid's barely 17 at the most. There's no way he can handle the responsibility of having the key to his own seal. I bet that as soon as he has it, he goes off tinkering with it, no doubt releasing the fox and killing himself in the process. Naruto felt a cold drop of sweat roll down his neck as he chuckled sheepishly. Really, Geratora, there's no need for the mistrust. I have faith in young Naruto, he'll take good care of the seal. The toad just crossed his arms over his chest as his suddenly shrank down, the scroll disappearing into his belly. Why doesn't the kid just sign the toad contract? Then we could keep a hold of it and he could summon us if he needed the seal for whatever reason. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the stubborn toad. He was getting in the way of his plans. No way would he let Naruto tamper with the seal in the way he wanted to. Jiraiya just turned around, looking at Naruto tiredly. The day had dragged on enough as it was already. Would you consider that, Naruto? I don't know if you already have a summoning contract, but the toads are excellent summons. If it makes any difference, your father was also a summoner and I'm sure, Bunter, would love to meet the son of Minato. Naruto smiled kindly but shook his head slowly. I'm sorry, Jiraiya, but while I respect my father, I have no intention of becoming his clone. I have to live my own life and forge my own path, find strength through my own means instead of blindly following in his footsteps. It sounded slightly hypocritical considering 2 of his main techniques were the Rasengan and a form of the Hiraishin, but he didn't know back then, so he wasn't really at fault. Jiraiya just nodded his head in understanding before turning back to the toad. I thought as much. That leaves you no choice, Geratora. The seal belongs to Naruto. It is his birthright. The clearly disgruntled toad just looked between the two again with narrowed eyes. Fine. But know that I'm not happy about this. If the kid manages to blow himself up and unleash the QB on the world again, then know that I'm not to blame. He sprang back up to his original height and Naruto watched in some wonder as his chest unraveled into a very large scroll, revealing one of the most complex and beautiful seals Naruto had ever seen. Jiraiya pulled the large scroll off his own back, pulling a slightly smaller one out of it before he ran through some hand seals, pressing a chakra-laced hand on Geratora's opened belly. Immediately the ink of the seal began to writhe around on the page before it moved as one body, draining itself into the scroll Jiraiya had provided. It was over in a few moments, and after checking the new scroll to see if the transfer was successful, because Kami helped them if it wasn't, he handed it over to Naruto. The blonde quickly slung it around his shoulders, letting it hang diagonally across his back by the large shoulder strap along its length. Take good care of that kid. If it gets into the wrong hands, suffice to say it won't end well. Naruto nodded with a small smile as the two turned and departed from one another. With a sigh that only spoke of annoyance, Geratora bobbed along after Jiraiya, knowing that no good could come from what he had allowed to happen. Naruto on the other hand had to hide a small gleeful smile as he walked away, lightly patting the large scroll on his back. Now we can get started. Fu giggled happily, acting like the child Naruto had found her as, although significantly happier now thanks to her brother. She rode atop his shoulders, clutching the candied apple in her hand that Naruto had bought from a vendor as they walked through the streets. She noticed the people staring at Naruto or sometimes outright glaring at him, but she also saw him ignore them, so she followed suit. The two Jinchuriki wandered aimlessly through Konoha. There seemed to be some kind of small festival going on, so they tried their hands at a few stall games. Being a shinobi village, the stalls were suitably beefed up, although they were still easy enough that a genin stood somewhat of a chance at winning if he was lucky enough. There was one stall where the player had to hit targets with shuriken, easy enough if you discounted the stall owner using mid-level wind jutsu to knock the projectiles askew. However, when Naruto had taken his turn, he waited until the man used his jutsu before subtly attaching a single chakra thread to the shuriken, putting it back on course to land in the dead center of the target. Fu now rode his shoulders, proudly clutching an enormous stuffed wolf, a toy that looked like something the Inuzuka would give to their ninken as a chew toy. He looked up at her beaming face with a smile, remembering a similar situation he had shared with Tayuya so many years ago now, although in this case Fu was in no hurry to give away her prize to a passing kid. Naruto didn't blame her. Without a real childhood, he could see the girl clinging to anything that brought the two of them closer as a family. He barely noticed as the two of them began to move further towards the outskirts of the town, just following the random directions of Fu as she just pointed in any direction. When he even realized how far they had gone, he was already on the edge of the training grounds, noting the sign that warded civilians from the area in case of stray weapons or jutsu. He was about to turn back to the village when the sounds of fighting broke out through the trees before once again being muffled by the surroundings. His curiosity piqued at the chance of perhaps seeing a decent spar or maybe picking up a new technique. He slowly made his way through the forest in the direction of the sound. However, it was strange. It was as if the closer he got to the disturbance, the quieter it would get. Even to his impressive hearing, he was having difficulties picking up the subtle clashes of metal that spoke of a weapons fight. Finally, they emerged into a large training ground, obviously designed for the purpose of testing large or powerful techniques, except there was nobody there. It was only his lifetime's worth of training and honing his combat instincts that gave him the time to quickly throw Fu out of the way before twisting his body impossibly to escape the large, familiar bandaged mass that would have cleaved his body apart otherwise. He backflipped away, taking in the man he particularly did not want to see right now, or ever really. Sharpened, shark-like teeth smiled maliciously at him as the large man they belonged to casually leaned on the enormous mass that was his sword. "Hey brat, long time no see." Kisame Hoshigaki smiled confidently at the ever so slightly panicking Chunin before him. Naruto was no slouch when it came to fighting. He had beaten enemies more powerful than himself numerous times before. However, there was a difference between being confident in your abilities and suicide, and now was such a time. Naruto was proud of the progress he had made in his time, but if all of that had taught him one thing, it was that he would not be the winner of this fight. Kisame was his better in strength, kenjutsu, close-range fighting, and probably tactics as well, given his former status as the leader of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist. He also had a larger range of jutsu in his arsenal and a chakra reserve that could literally compare to that of a biju, earning him the nickname the Tailless Beast. Not to mention his blasted sword, which could literally suck the chakra from his body. Somehow they believed his strategy that had worked against Shino all that time ago wouldn't work now. Same Hada was a hungry sword. "Fu, get out of here now." The young girl was looking at the blue-skinned man, knowing full well who he was and what he was capable of. She almost didn't hear her brother call out, but managed at the last second to unleash her wings to make a desperate attempt to get away from the fight where she was woefully outclassed. However, before she could do so, a strong hand grasped her foot, pulling her firmly back down to the earth. She twisted in her captor's grasp until she looked around, straight up at the three Tomo Sharingan of Itachi Uchiha. "Hello Naruto, it's been a while." That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.